Dear ladies and gentlemen, so-called believers and unbelievers, this is our 200th chapter and over 1,000 subscribers, and we would like to take this opportunity to recapitulate upon what we have achieved in less than a year since YouTube arbitrarily terminated our earlier series. I would like to reiterate yet again the obvious, that we have throughout our chapters based all our information, statements and conclusions entirely upon the very Arabic language, records, sources and scripture of the followers of Muhammad by quoting book, chapter and verse from them. Nonetheless, and as all of you well know, we have suffered and continue to endure vicious attacks by our Muhammadan adversaries, Satans, accusing us of deception, lies and misquotation without once proving anything we have said as either untrue or false. Their anger against us is utterly misplaced, but understandable, since they are actually venting their fury and rage at our revelations of the facts and reality of the cult of Muhammad and Islam. They are shocked, humiliated and traumatized by our enlightening chapters that are revealing the truth about Muhammad, his Quran and his Sunnah, so much so that they attack us, the messengers, when in verity and actuality they are subconsciously attacking our revealing message of their Quran. To keep what little is left of their sanity after years and decades of indoctrination, they must therefore recede into the shelter of mental denial of all facts and realities. That is why they cannot even agree to a single one of our chapters without having to abandon their cult belief system and apostatize at the risk of being butchered for choosing to opt out. Ladies and gentlemen, please be aware that although there are millions upon millions of moderate, law-abiding and decent followers of Muhammad who do not subscribe to everything they are instructed by their mullahs, unfortunately, nonetheless, and most assuredly, there is absolutely nothing moderate about Muhammad's Quran. Muhammad's Quran is totally and unalterably radical and has no shades. Most important of all is the fact that these moderate Muhammadan Muslims are considered disbelievers and hence enemies by their believing counterpart because they do not follow the hate-mongering, war-mongering and racist jihadi verses of Muhammad's Quran. I shall reiterate many statements and conclusions in this chapter that appear in different ones in our series so as to condense them herein. Based entirely upon the Arabic language of the Quran, in numerous surahs which assert that Adam, Abraham, Ishmael, Isaac, Jacob, the tribes of Israel, Moses, Aaron, Jesus, Mary and his disciples were all Muslims, the corollary of which is simply that any being in the universe who declares that it believes in a one and only God is automatically a Muslim and has absolutely nothing to do with Muhammad or his Quran. We have thus very clearly destroyed the myths and dogma that Islam, which only means submission to the will of one God, was Muhammad's invention and that it belongs to himself and his followers only. This concept clearly preceded Muhammad and his Quran by at least 2,500 years. This revelation alone has caused enormous psychological and theological torment and discomfort to many followers of Muhammad who have not been aware of this fact. We are Muslims since we believe in a one and only God. Our mother tongue is Arabic. We only quote chapter and verse from the very Arabic language of the Quran, hadiths, and the books of the Muhammadan exegetes. Nonetheless, we are repeatedly accused by the followers of Muhammad of misquoting, misrepresenting, deceiving, misleading, or taking out of context these very verses from their own scripture without once identifying where, when, and how we have done so. The followers of Muhammad do not seem to comprehend the enormous intellectual and theological consequences of the depravity of their accusations, because if their scriptural sources that we are addressing are false, then Muhammad's Sunnah is also false. If the hadiths and sunnah are false, then the Quran cannot be true and hence cannot be divine, thus agreeing with us by confirming our own conclusions that this is actually the case, that the Quran is ungodly. Hence, by denying the veracity of the very Arabic sources that we are quoting, they are actually committing theological suicide. Nonetheless, that is exactly what they are doing repeatedly. We have debunked in chapter 3, Who is a Muslim?, the Muhammadan assertion that Islam means peace, when in fact it only means submission. We have shown in chapter 4, Who is Allah?, that Allah is not the God of Moses or Jesus, but only the name of the supreme rock god of Muhammad's pagan tribe of Quraysh. The name Allah was common among the pagan Arabs centuries before Muhammad or his Quran. Contrary to the mendacious assertions of the followers of Muhammad that the women of Islam are liberated, we have established in chapter 5, Women in Islam, very clearly that Muhammad's Sunnah considers the females of the human species as evil and stupid, just one step higher than domestic animals who should be utterly subjugated and terrorized by their male counterpart. The conditions of women in Muhammadan countries that we witness daily in the news speak volumes about their subjugation, humiliation, and degradation, and nullify all the deceptions and lies of the followers of Muhammad to the contrary. We have demonstrated conclusively in chapter 7, Jihad in Islam, that jihad is not a spiritual struggle, but actually eternal warfare against all so-called unbelieving kuffar, the inhabitants of Dar al-Harb, the territories of war, 80% of humanity. We have utterly demolished in chapter 13, Hijab, the lies and deceptions by the followers of Muhammad regarding the hijab, by clearly proving that there is not a single verse in the Quran containing the word hijab that asserts that the female Muhammadans should be covered from head to toe with clothing excepting their eyes. These rules were created by the later male followers of Muhammad as means of for subjugating, humiliating, degrading, and controlling the body, mind, and soul of their womenfolk. We have completely eradicated in chapter 15, Night Journey or Laylatul Qadr, their claim that Muhammad's night journey was to Jerusalem, and shown that if it were, then Muhammad obviously lied and deceived his followers by asserting that he was at the Temple of Solomon, a temple that did not exist in his lifetime since it had already been destroyed by the Romans 570 years earlier. Our chapter 17, Predestination in the Quran, elucidates that the Muhammadan dogma of predestination makes human free will null and void, thus making Allah an evil, immoral, and unjust divinity devoid of any mercy or compassion. We have proven in chapter 18, abrogating and abrogated verses in the Quran, that the Quran is not divinely revealed because in actuality it is Muhammad's own biography, his alter ego. Therefore, there is not a single letter, let alone a word, a verse, ayah, or a chapter, surah in the Quran that could possibly have been revealed by an omniscient God. Every letter, word, verse, and chapter in the Quran are the product of Muhammad's imagination projected into the unsuspecting mouth of Allah to give them divine authority. We have debunked the accusations made against the Europeans and Christians for the enslavement of the Africans by showing conclusively in chapter 20, Islam and African Slavery, that it was the Arabs and their Muhammadan black Africans who systematically and brutally slaughtered, raped, enslaved, and transported over 140 million black Africans to sell them to the Europeans, awaiting their human cargo in ships at the ports of Africa. We have destroyed in chapter 21 myths of Islamic civilization by conclusively showing that it actually was a Mawali civilization based entirely upon men who belonged to the conquered nations and were not Arab. In chapter 26, the Charter of Umar, we have illustrated how blatantly false are the declarations of the followers of Muhammad regarding how well they treat their other faiths under their control. In chapter 39, Arab and Islamic imperialism, we have demonstrated that Arab imperialism surpassed in magnitude of conquest, slaughter, plunder, and duration any other imperialism in human recorded history. That fundamentalist Arab and Mohammedan imperialism was and is totally parasitic, without ever contributing anything of value to the conquered peoples besides sucking up their blood, sweat, wealth, and culture. We have confirmed in chapter 44, was Muhammad illiterate, that Muhammad was actually literate based exclusively upon their stories of hadith.